Sometimes when we begin to question our faith or have doubts about our tradition, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert. When we take a step back and honestly evaluate organized religion in the 21st century, many times it doesn't make any sense. The more we cling to it and try to save it, the worse it becomes. In addition, widespread abuse, cover-ups, and victim shaming cause some of us to question whether it will ever be right again.
The Desert Sanctuary was created by Karl and Laura Forehand. It consists of a podcast, a blog, along with Karl and Laura's writing.
We're happy you're here. Welcome to the show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand. And we have a guest who's been a guest before, but I think this is going to be a very interesting and exceptional conversation.
Yeah, actually, still unofficially one of the co-hosts, right? We haven't done too much co-hosting in the recent months, but we've been doing about 2 podcasts a week. He's been recovering from some surgery, and so it's good to have you back in action.
You probably should say Aaron Tomlinson.
And we should say his name, right? It's Aaron Tomlinson, the one and only, the often imitated, never duplicated.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys. I'd like to be on more, but that's on me. So maybe we can change that this year.
Yeah, for sure. We've been doing about 2 podcasts a week. So during October, November, December, we had almost exclusively women that we interviewed. And this month we've been talking about church harm, and we missed out on having you in that discussion. So feel free if you need to branch off into that, because we're just coming out of that.
All right.
But the new series is called Things We Don't Understand But Want to Understand Better. And we take a stab at all this and look at things that I think so many of these things were taboo to us in Christianity and in the evangelical Christianity, where, everything that smacked of something different was inherently evil. I had somebody, a Catholic person this morning, jump on me because she thought I was being too humanist, and there's a lot of be careful, you got to listen to the Pope and all that stuff. I said I did never listen to the Pope, but anyway, but it always kind of scared us. So let's, I'm not sure exactly how to get into this, but let's talk about not necessarily other religions. There's Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist, Islam, all those things that are other religions that would take a lot of time, just one of those. But some of the things we're going to do this and just jump in however you want. Some of the things we're going to do this month, we're going to interview a medium, hopefully a witch. We've already interviewed tarot reader and astrology person. I want to interview a Satanist, and I want to share some stuff with you about Satanists later.
All right.
But also the term post-Christian is really interesting to me, and we're going to interview Maria French later this month. She's written a book called Safer Than the Known Way to talk about post-Christianity and so on. So where do you want to start, Aaron?
Wow. I guess these are all topics that I love and I'm really, really interested in. I came out of sort of a hyper deliverance group. What I mean by that was everything was a demon. And we used to have these things we called Freedom Weekends, where we would take people through a whole weekend of, don't mess with tarot cards, don't mess with Ouija boards, did you ever mess with witchcraft? And you have to repent, renounce. We take them through all this stuff. And so I think it's just funny, that was more than a decade ago, probably. I just think it's funny where I'm at now. But one of the things for me, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier when we were talking about post-Christian. What does a post-Christian world look like? I think there's many ways you can look at that, right? There's what does a post-Christian world look like? A post-Christian America, if it ever happens. But also, what's a post-Christian person look like?
Yeah.
One of the things we've talked about is people seem to have this really binary idea that you either have to be a Christian or an atheist and go one way or the other. And so I love that we're talking about this stuff, Karl, because excuse me, because I didn't, atheism, I mean, I flirted with it, I guess. We've got some good mutual friends that have really gone down that path, but that's just not for me. And so what I began to do was look at these alternative forms of Western spirituality. So you mentioned, we could talk about other Eastern religions, stuff like that, but there's a very rich Western tradition. There's a very rich occult tradition in America, very rich occult tradition in America, that's been around for centuries. And I find it fascinating. I find it invigorating. I love everything about it. So I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
So let's back up to a couple of those words. The deliverance ministries, a big guy right now in that field is Greg Locke. Right now, he became really famous on social media, like 2 million followers because of his Trump stuff, and then he became famous. Now he has a tent outside of his church in Tennessee, where it's, kind of constant casting out demons. How do you see that now, that deliverance thing, because of the things that have changed in your life? Why or why not do you hold to that deliverance thing? What do you attest? I guess I would say, how do you describe or explain demonic possession, that kind of stuff? Is that real or is it not?
Yeah, I would say, and I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, and I don't want to, trigger anybody.
Yeah.
But one of the things, a lot of people that have deconstructed, have completely done away with the devil. I certainly have a different view on the devil than I did when I was in Christianity. And I think the biblical idea of Lucifer is, unsubstantiated. This whole idea that Lucifer was, next to Michael and the angel hierarchy or above him or whatever, and led this rebellion of a third of the angels. I mean, that's a fairy tale. But I do believe in extra-physical reality, and I do believe in evil. And so I do think there are entities, energies, consciousness, whatever you want to call them, that are evil, that sometimes do possess people. And I think a lot of possession is in the Christian church. I think a lot of people that are possessed by evil are people like Greg Locke. I mean, I find him very distasteful. I find him, we're going to talk about witchcraft. In my view, he's practicing black magic and witchcraft more than, any Satanist I've ever been around. Yeah. And I've been around a few. So
how much of that quote unquote possession is trauma, and dark energy between people and things like that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think a vast majority of what you see on TV, and by that I don't mean Hollywood, and I'm not talking about movies like The Exorcist and stuff. I'm talking about,
Benny Hinn and
Benny Hinn came out not long ago and admitted that he would have people giving false testimonies, basically, to get the crowd worked up to, build their faith. I was around a lot of, big name ministers who were really Machiavellian, the ends justify the means. If we can exaggerate our stories, if it builds people's faith and helps them get healed, that's kind of how they would talk about it. So I think the vast majority of that is BS. I think it's a lot of trauma. I think it's a lot of people who are falling under a form of hypnosis. And that's why I said the ones that are doing that are the ones that are practicing black magic and witchcraft, because black magic is a form of manipulation, exerting your will over someone else's will, putting curses on people. The way Greg Locke curses you if you're a liberal or you're a Democrat, that's you might as well we might as well be at a time when we're going down to the local folk magic practitioner and excuse me, cursing our enemies. So I think a lot of it is psychological. A lot of it could be some dark energies. And then I do think there's an authentic possession. I think most of that I've encountered, at least, is related more to places, houses, geographical regions, things like that, and less related to human possession.
Yeah.
But I do believe, the Catholic Church, maybe they got that part right. You got to go through a lot of criteria before they'll bring in the exorcist to rule out mental illness and faking it and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
that's kind of where I'm at with it, Karl.
Yeah, for sure. In my own personal experience, the shadow experience that I had was intense, and it felt like what I previously would have described as possession, and demons or something that needed to be cast out and so on. But it wasn't alleviated by a holy man. It was alleviated by presence and compassion for my inner self and things like that. And that's what made it better.
We did have a few things. I mean, we should do, let's just do a podcast at some point on demonic possession. Let's just come back, because that's a whole, I don't want to derail the conversation on that. So let's just do that sometime.
That's if we kind of back up to Satan, I want to talk about Satanists a little bit and what I've learned recently. So if we go back to Satan in the first century, that's, it's the stage actor, it's the adversary. Right. And so we're talking about that kind of informally, our adversary or whatever's working against us. And so that definition changed over time of who Satan was, with Dante and different influences along the way. We had to have a bigger fear factor, right? People, also the idea of eternal conscious torment went along with that, right? So you may have a better grasp on history than I do, but that we could safely say that developed over time. And most people that are going through any type of deconstruction, that's the first thing they get rid of is the idea of Satan and hell. And then you still kind of deal with those energies and those, like you're talking about, you deal with the problem of evil and all of that. And that's a whole different category if you don't start with just the absolute wrath of God expressed in eternal conscious torment and a villain that he created and all of that stuff. But that's a long thing. But here's what I know about Satanists. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the left-hand path and things like that. But Satanists, most of them don't worship Satan. There was so it's described as there's reactive Satanists, which would take the biblical story and just say, well, Satan is the honorable side, and it's a reaction to Christianity, basically. There is the realistic, described as the realistic Satanists, and that would be the Church of Satan from 1966 or somewhere around in there, where neither God nor Satan is actually real. Celebration of self and probably more humanist viewpoint and so on. But then there's also the theistic or esoteric Satanists, like the Satanic Temple, I was surprised when I read Satanic Temple tenets. Have you ever read those?
I'm not familiar with that group specifically, no.
So, which probably the Satanic Temple is the most popular right now, but here's what they are. Let me read them to you real quick. First one is, and I'm looking at a different screen, so one should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Number two, the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. The freedom of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedom of another is to forego one's own will. Beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care not to distort the scientific facts in one's own beliefs. People are fallible. Number six, if one makes a mistake, one should do one's best to rectify it and resolve any harm that might have been caused. Number seven, every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. So that really surprised me. that if that is, that's true, that brand, but the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, neither one believes in an actual being called Satan. And when I discovered that was when I one of the state houses in the United States, there was a demonstration by some Satanists, and they were sitting peacefully, in a rotunda, protesting something. And on the other side, of course, was the fire and brimstone preacher, who really looked like the foolish guy in this situation, and they were just peacefully protesting something. What do you got to say about all that?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, identifying Satanism is kind of like identifying what a Christian believes. There's various different groups. The most famous or notorious, depending on how you look at it, of course, is Anton LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible, and a lot of people that follow Anton LaVey's form of Satanism are certainly
that would be the Church of Satan, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was kind of the one that brought it into public consciousness, I guess I would say, the idea of Satanism. And then his brand of it, if I can say it that way, is they don't believe in a literal Satan. It's very materialistic, very rooted in this life. But Michael Aquino, who was one of his associates, who wrote or edited editions of the Satanic Bible, he broke off from Anton LaVey and started the Temple of Set. And they do pay homage to Satan as Set, and coming out of Egyptian mythology and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, there's various different groups out there. There's other groups. Michael W. Ford, I don't remember the name of his group, but his approach is, worshiping the ancient gods. So he's really a great scholar and goes back and looks at the gods that predate Christianity, that predate even Christian conversion. So, like, if you look at the horned god in, I want to say Europe, I think it originated in the British Isles, but I could be wrong about that. Was venerated. And what happened was, during Christian conversions, is these gods were turned into Satan. So the idea of Satan being a horned god comes from European deities that were then later vilified, if I could use that term. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of these personas that we get, these ideas like that Dante and stuff, we're drawing from. that we get today. So, but
And
yeah, let me
what
say
I-
this. Let me say this, Carl, because
Okay.
one of the things that shocked me when and I have to tell the story. I remember coming to the realization that my Christian faith was not working for me anymore. And first time I went to a holistic fair, I think I've shared this on this podcast before. First time I went to a holistic fair, and I was there in fear and trembling, because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get a demon. First time I went and got a tarot card reading from somebody, oh my God, I'm going to get a
Catch
demon.
the flu.
Yeah. And that was 8 years ago. And I'm so removed from that line of thinking now. I think it's hysterical that people think that.
Mhm.
But here's part of the problem too. People do not understand, from a Christian perspective, what Satanism is. They don't understand other people's religions because they won't take time to listen. And
Right.
so we spread lies about them. People do not understand what the occult is. The
Right.
word occult comes from ocular. It means the study or the practice of that which is unseen.
Mhm.
And most
like
occultists,
religion, like theology.
exactly. Christians themselves are occultists by the definition of the word. But the occult in America really can trace its roots back to a woman named Madame Blavatsky in I want to say late 1800s, who was a Russian woman who claims to have traveled the Far East and basically traveled the world, and she was looking for the common thread among all religions, and she started a group called Theosophy, and that really took off in America. And she's the first one to use the term in English or to define left-hand path, right-hand path spirituality, which we can talk about. But Theosophy, so Sophie, is where it means wisdom, Sophia, and Theo means God. So most occultists are practicing a deeper devotion to God, and in the West, to what we would know as the Judeo-Christian God, than most Christians. That's what the occult is. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that started in England in the late 1800s and then came to the United States. Aleister Crowley is one of the famous, offshoots. His group was one of the offshoots of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They are uber dedicated to virtue and mysticism and oneness with God. That's what the occult is. The tarot cards come out of Christian Europe. We can talk about that later, but most of the images on the tarot card are Christian images.
Yeah.
But we went around saying, oh, it's all evil. That's all, and we just didn't know what the hell we were talking about. So we're lying about stuff, and we're spreading lies to our followers, and people are spreading lies to their parishioners about things, and very much so about Satanism. You can go think about the Satanic Panic I don't know if you remember that, Carl, in the I think it's late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, for sure.
And most of that turned out to be total bullshit.
Right.
So
I want to go back to Set. You mentioned Set and Satanism. Certain branches, the Satanic Temple actually, I think, uses that deity or refers to that. And Set is the Egyptian god of self-improvement, self-creation.
Yep.
That's kind of the focus there. Is definitely, nothing destructive about, even though it's kind of a deity and, you're focusing on that. And it would be interesting to have a whole discussion about, when we focus on a deity, what are we really trying to do? No deity that has any self-respect or, self-confidence or whatever, that's a real deity would demand our worship. That's it's like, I'm immature, right, to demand worship. Anyway.
Yep.
So just to back up to a real high level, when I was a pastor in the final days of my pastorship in the last church, before I went to the bigger church to hide out for a while, one of the biggest issues was that we had begun experimenting with meditation and yoga. And some people found out about that. So the ex-pastor in our congregation, for a while was my best friend. but until he found out that I drank and
No.
occasionally, and that I did. The big one was yoga, and we were messaging.
Mhm.
And then he finally came to, we went out to supper or something and talked about it. But I said, what specific problem do you have with yoga?
Mhm.
And he, of course, didn't have us. So he went to the internet real quick, and he found an article from a Baptist pastor who had read one book
Mhm.
that from some lady that and I think still today, if you searched what's wrong with yoga, it would come up with that same article from that same Baptist pastor, and then someone else in the church quoted the same article to me, and then someone back from my old hometown messaged me when I posted something about yoga, and they were quoting the same article. And other than that, would just be careful. It's dangerous. And I said, why is it dangerous? And no one knows. It's just not what they do.
That's exactly what happens in the church. There's somebody, writes something about what other people do in their practices. And then we just read that. We don't talk to somebody that actually practices it. We don't look into the roots or the history of it. We just go by what, like you said, that article. I mean, that's gossip, basically. Like, I'm taking it secondhand and then spreading it. It's gossip on a massive scale. I mean, think about the stuff the church does. Just think about all the things that we said were sins, right? Like gossip on a massive scale. I mean, even just politically, get us going around saying that, I remember when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of people going around saying that Tom Hanks, and was a pedophile because he did a pizza sketch on Saturday Night Live, and they were tying that back to Pizzagate. And here were people that were part of my church that would just open their mouth and say the most horrible, slanderous, awful things about people that they did not know and they could not prove. And that's gossip on a national scale.
Right.
And it's coming mostly from the church.
Yeah. It's in most cases just ridiculous. But it stirs people up. I mean, this lady that was upset with us in the church almost got every single woman in the church behind her. There was a fervor, and finally extinguished that fire. And but just as much as they loved us, and they we were favored there, and we did well, and all of that, it just about totally blew up. But it was one of the things where I said months later, I just don't want to do this anymore, because they're not going to change because they're still in that system, and they have to have another. They have to have something to be afraid of and someone to be against. And so that's kind of the issue we find ourselves in with atheists and theists. It's a dualistic battle. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, we have lots of friends that are atheists. A lot of times they're much kinder than Christians, but they tend to get in the same kind of battles. Right. And, it's that same dualistic thing of, I'm going to prove you wrong and so show you how your logic is wrong.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that's being loving. That said, one of my best friends that's an atheist was the one that's called me every week since my stroke.
Right.
So, we can make comparisons there also.
Yeah.
I'm just taking a side route here, but we talked about it before, and I think you mentioned it a little bit. This idea of being post-Christian. In my experience, my Baptist director of missions, which would be my regional supervisor, kind of guy, he was a good friend of mine, and we didn't end well when I left, but for the most part, he's my friend, and he was a educated man, and he did his homework and so on. So he said to me, probably 10 years ago from today, he said, we live in a post-Christian world. Mm-hmm. Even though he was a Southern Baptist, he's not going down that road, he's not going to step outside of that at all. So I'm reading a book right now by Maria Francesca French, who's a professor that just wrote a book called Safer Than the Normal Way, or something like that. I'm going to reread it again, but it talks about that label of post-Christian. What's your experience of that? And we're going to go into that in depth with her, but just as a broad overview,
it depends on what she means by that. I'm not familiar with her work.
Yeah, for sure.
So can you give me some parameters for post-Christian? What exactly are you talking about when you say
well? So what I want is just your view of that. That first of all, are we in a post-Christian age? And then my daughter and I were debating last night. What if I call myself post-Christian? Does that have implications? And some people don't. Some people are maybe beyond Christianity, but they don't even want that Christian name on there, even though that's our roots, that's our soil we grow out of. So I'm just asking for your initial impressions.
Okay. That helps me. Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Europe is in a post-Christian world. I think if you go over to Europe, some of the Western European countries, at least for sure. It's the interesting thing about Europe is their basilicas and their, churches are the center of their towns, and they have these ancient churches that are just, gorgeous to go and see. But for the most part, I would say that they're very secular humanist. They don't have to deal with this myth of being a Christian nation. In America, I don't think we're anywhere close to being in a post-Christian world at all. Not even close. And I don't know that we'll get there in my lifetime. The weaponization of faith in the political arena, I would cite that. And I think in most surveys, you can always look at George Barna's stuff. When we were in the church, George Barna was always the downer, right? He was always the one making us depressed, making us feel like we weren't being effective. But, still, most people cling to the Christian ideal of God in some shape or form in America. And then if you look at Africa and South America, they're predominantly, in a lot of those countries, Christian. So I think Europe, for sure. Other than that, I don't think we're anywhere close to being in a post-Christian world. But again, I haven't read, I look at it from a scholarly perspective. That's just my point of view.
I mean, if we moved from 60% of people, I don't know what that stat is exactly, but going to church, being committed to church, and 40% now. I mean, it's going below half. And only 4% of Gen Z is committed to Christianity. But I think the thing is, we're still entangled with it so much in different ways. Either I'm still anti-Christian, or atheist means anti. Doesn't it mean not theist?
Yeah, not theist.
Anti-theism or whatever. So it's definitely moving that way, because here's why I care about it. I get entangled in deconstruction language, because people say I'm deconstructing. Well, then their natural action is, after a little while, well, now that I'm more progressive, or now that I'm kind of orthodox, I'll reconstruct under an old system or a more woke system or whatever. And I'll draw a circle again around my beliefs. And now that's where I am. That's what I'm going to defend. And by the way, I'm against you because you're different,
Yeah.
So there's the otherizing and all that. I guess my interest is in having some kind of language or framework where I can move forward with an open theology, with an optimistic explorer attitude, and have some way to describe that without putting myself in an atheist box, or even a humanist or naturalist box or whatever.
Right.
but moving forward, trying to be fully human, trying to be open to discovering and keep discovering. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense. And I think I've been talking to some people about this. So this, I would say, post-Christian on a personal level, right? I would push back. Here's why I don't think we're in a post-Christian era or anywhere close to it, because you can look at churches are declining, and churches have been declining. Church attendance has been declining for decades. Some of that's the internet. Some of that is you can listen to podcasts that have preaching. You can watch YouTube, Christian television. When
we don't need any of that, basically. We don't even need to go there.
We don't need church, but just think about it in our lifetime. I mean, yeah, we didn't have 24-hour news cycles either, but we didn't have Christian television. We had Jimmy Swaggart and I don't know, who's the guy, Rex Humbard, on Sunday mornings or something like that.
Yeah.
You didn't have Christian radio stations. You didn't have Christian music. You had Petra, a few groups like that. You look at the explosion of Christian music, Christian radio stations, podcasts, the popularity of people like Mark Driscoll and Joel Osteen. You look at, Barnes and Noble, the Christian section has grown while the New Age, quote unquote, section has shrunk. So, I'm looking at stuff like that to say, members of Congress, I come from Lauren Boebert's district, sadly and shamefully. But, the rhetoric, the Christian rhetoric that they use. I think we were closer to a post-Christian era in the 60s, to be honest.
Yeah. So I think what's hard, I think, is, well, if I'm going to go on a journey, if I'm going to go on a real journey, if I'm really going to explore, then I can't look for a well-worn path, and I also can't.
Yeah, sure.
Especially I don't want a cement highway, that's well established. And, when I try to pick out a destination, it still destroys the nature of an adventure, and the nature of really being open. You're not really open if you're deciding I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
That you're not. And so we can't have anything. We can't move to any place new as long as, I'm an atheist. I'm a post-Christian person, right?
I like the term post-Christian used in that way. And I think on a personal level, that's one of the things I've been talking to people about. If you don't become an atheist and you still have a drive for spirituality, where do you go post-Christian? And I think that's a very interesting conversation to have. And I like what you're saying about, the well-trodden path. And that's really primarily the difference. We mentioned right-hand path, left-hand path. A lot of people don't know what that is, I'm sure. But it's basically two different approaches to spirituality. The right-hand path would be conformity, the pathway of conformity. So you're looking for that well-worn path, whether that's within, Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or Sufism or, whatever. But it's conformity. It's conformity to something outside of yourself. Left-hand path is all about the God of Set. It's all about self-expression and self-exploration. And the advantage to the right-hand path is you got a well-worn path, right? The positive thing about the left-hand path is you're free to be eclectic. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that you're doing these things, because I hope it's going to disarm people to realize, that tarot cards, for example, are not evil. Witchcraft is not evil. Satanism, even in most of its expressions. In
Greg Locke is evil.
Yeah, well, yeah, there is that, huh? Touche. But you see what I'm saying? Like liberate people to try yoga, try energy work and Reiki, and try, getting a tarot card reading, or having your astrology chart done, or those kinds of things.
I wish I knew exactly what the word compost means, because post-Christianity, compost is in the word compost, but I like to think of compost when I think of things like Christianity and the Bible and things like that, because it can be something that's dying or declining, that's becoming nutrients for the future. We could say it's the soil I grow out of. It's the compost that enriched where I'm going. And I can't get away from that. I can't just ignore that Christianity is in my past, because it's it's part of the new growth that's happening in me. The thing is, just like compost, I want to avoid getting it on me.
Right.
Right. Because Laura says it stinks. I think it smells kind of sweet. Maybe because I'm thinking about what it's going to do for the soil, that I'm going to grow out of, and it provides that nutrition for it. So I'm still willing to be attached and say, and to me, it kind of says past Christianity, post Christianity. I'm past it. Anyway, we kind of beat that one to death, I think, maybe. So we mentioned a couple of times witches.
Yep.
I don't know a lot, and you recommended someone. I'm going to see if I can get on to talk a little bit. I've talked to one of the choir authors that's before, that's an eclectic witch or some. One of my favorite TikTok people is Jordan the White Witch. She's entertaining, and she's really an anti-theist. Yeah. And I don't know what she practices and so on, but I want to look into that. What do you know about witches and Wiccans and things like that start with W?
Yeah, sure. So, the word, I had to look it up before the podcast. The word witchcraft in its origins is a very negative term. Specifically refers to someone who practices magic, but someone who practices baneful magic. So what that means is someone who practices harmful magic that invokes curses and hexes and things like that to do harm to people. But I want to say, sometime during the first half of the 20th century, there was a British man by the name of Gerald Gardner who introduced Wicca to the general public, to recover sort of a white magic, I guess you could say, path that is based on, do what you will as long as you don't do any harm to anyone else, and really centered around.
Is that the 3 times rule? Have you ever heard of that? The 3 times rule. Whatever you do to someone, may be done to you 3 times.
Come back on you 3 times. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that did come from Gardner's work and the evolution and development of Wicca in the latter part of the 20th century. So most people, whether they realize it or not, if they're practicing witchcraft today, call themselves Wiccan, they owe a great debt to Mr. Gardner, because he brought it back. But one of the things I think is beautiful about it is really a practice that can help people get in harmony with nature, which I think is so important in the day and age in which we live, with all the technology and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of ceremonies focus around the moon, new moon ceremonies, full moon ceremonies, new moon magic, full moon magic, but also the seasons. Their high holidays are the equinox and the solstice holidays, and so there's a harmonizing with nature and a working with spirits. So they would also believe in extra physical realities that are, some of them benevolent, some of them evil, and some of them just neutral, and some of them like human beings doing their best. They're just a largely populated world of spirits and things like that. And so most of the magic rituals.
So you say you say getting in touch with nature. Some people react to that. Some people embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people talking about it though now. And when I was a pastor, people told me their best worship experiences was in nature,
Right.
or driving their car for some reason. But
Only time they got outside.
why is it? And why do you think it's important that we connect with nature?
Well,
I know the fear in Christianity. They're afraid we're going to worship the creation rather than the creator or whatever. Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're part of it, right? I mean, we're part of it. We're here because of this planet. We're here because of natural processes. And I think a lot of mental illness, anxiety, depression, and I'm a practicing clinician, professionally trained, academically trained.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is just simply being out of sync and out of step with the world around us. And by that, I don't mean the societies we've created. I just mean actually Earth, planet Earth. You go back, and very important in Native American religions is the mother, talking about the earth, talking about Gaia, the divine feminine being embodied by the earth and by nature. And of course, that's going to scare off Christians, but I don't know. I mean, if we're going to be post-Christian, I like to believe in the evolution of some kind of post-Christian spirituality. And I think witchcraft provides people a way to explore that also puts them back in harmony with themselves and nature. That's my thought.
As I was healing, I remember the times I spent on my front porch at 4 a.m, meditating and just being in nature. I remember just recognizing there was a rhythm or like a drum beat to nature, as animals would wake up and things would begin to sing their song. And the more I got in touch with how trees and it's interesting to study mushrooms, by the way. I mean, all of that, the communication and the ways all of that stuff interacts, and it's very fascinating. But it all just feels like a drum beat and a rhythm that would be better for us to be in than separated from it, in conjunction with it, connected to it, and maybe even communicating with it,
Yeah, nature spirits is a big part of Wicca. Elemental spirits, what they call elemental spirits, the gnomes that are connected to the earth, and the my memory escapes me, but it's funny. They have names for the different spirits. There's fire spirits and water spirits. And they call them elemental spirits, and for some reason I can't remember.
Right? Yeah, there's 4. Okay, so I think we've touched on a lot of the things today. One thing I'd like to, just hear from you is kind of a general thing. A lot of the desert sanctuary people might be deconstructing, or they're just questioning, or they're. We've interviewed a lot of people from churches like the IFB, who are extremely traumatized by religion and so on. And everybody's kind of on their different journey, on wobbly legs and trying to move forward. And sometimes we get scared and we jump back into something that was more like what we used to know. But I guess kind of, what would be your overall advice when we're looking into all this stuff, we're investigating it, and you may have already said it tonight. It's all right to repeat, but what would you say?
This is what I would say.
Former pastor and a wisdom lover.
Thank you. What I would say is the biggest psychological trauma. The more I think about this, I think the biggest psychological trauma that Christianity perpetrates on people is this idea that your beliefs have such heavy consequences, your beliefs and practices. The whole idea of justification by faith, since the Reformation, you're going to go to heaven or go to hell based on what you believe. Think about that.
Mhm.
And so we got your neighbors go to hell if you don't witness to them. You're going to miss the will of God if you don't, if you screw up, you're going to miss the will of God for your life. If you don't follow this path, you're not going to be blessed. I mean, put such heavy, heavy, heavy consequences and stakes, I'd say that, such high stakes on your beliefs and your decisions. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to get free of.
Mhm.
And once you're free of that, then you can have friends that are atheists or theists or, we were talking before the show. It's funny how atheists sometimes try to convert you more than Christians,
Mhm.
but a lot of them came out of Christianity and they still have that same idea that there's such high stakes in what you believe and practice.
Right.
And I would
Exactly.
say, especially when it comes to spirituality, there's not high stakes there. There really isn't. I remember having to take a group of people through the deconstruction process a couple of years ago. I would meet with them once a month, and it took 8 months just to get them to loosen up, just to get them to, it's okay. It's okay to explore people like Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris but it's also okay to explore the tarot. It's okay to explore the occult. It's okay to explore Satanism. One of my friends had turned me on to a particular author that's written a lot about Satanism. And I remember reading the first book and thinking, he's got 11 points of satanic philosophy. And I thought, not only do I match a lot of these points, but like, this is me. But I could argue from scripture, a lot of it fit Jesus as well. And they thought Jesus had demons. They accused him of operating by the power of Beelzebub. So
Right.
that's what I would say. That's what I would say to people, Karl, is the stakes aren't that high.
Right.
So chill out and explore and have fun. If you're not having fun, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. I would just say 100%. I think that's probably a good way to end. I appreciate you, man. I missed you while you've been out.
Yeah, thanks.
So look forward to the months ahead. We can get back into some of this and
For sure.
talk about some things like this that we're excited about. I do have a tendency sometimes to be a little hard on the church because I still see people being abused
Oh, yeah.
by the church, and it hurts me. And I want to speak up, and Laura and I kind of stand. We kind of sit in the gap, kind of by the side of that.
Yeah.
And try to, in some way, be there for people as they come out, but they tell us heartbreaking stories.
Mhm.
And I can't help but get a little emotional about that. But at the same time, I want to do what you're talking about. I don't want to be afraid to move ahead,
Mhm.
and the people that come along, I want to be some kind of help to them. And I think one thing we're discovering so much is that our stories that we tell are sacred, and just sharing those stories and having someone believe us is big time for us.
You're right.
So I appreciate you and your friendship. I appreciate the time today. And
Thank you.
We'll talk again soon, man.
All right. Sounds good, Karl. Thanks, man.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary. We hope you find who you are as you embark on your own journey.
For all of us here at the Desert Sanctuary, be who you are, be where you are, and be at peace.